you want to throw on the wheel, and then the piece gets done, and you say, now how do I glaze it?
Right. Yes.
Right.
That's exactly how I work. Yes.
So I'm trying to not have that problem by visualizing the skin of the work before I ever actually make the piece, so before it gets through the mold. So I kind of design the thing around what I believe is a sort of a union of form and surface. So I template it. It's very structured. I'll draw out a template, and I will throw as exactly as I can the piece that I believe I need to make, right? So if it's a decanter, I break it down into its neck and its belly and stuff, and I throw those pieces. Now, if you look carefully at my work, you'll notice that it seems both round and square, like it was actually slab built and not thrown.
Mm-hmm.
When I throw this work on the wheel, I throw it about 1 inch to 2 inches wider than it needs to be. And then I immediately cast plaster around that. So I have a plaster shell of the piece that was thrown on the wheel.
You pour that before while it's still wet then?
Yeah, I finish throwing the piece on the wheel, and I immediately pour plaster right over its surface.
Wow, okay.
And then I then have sort of a mathematical diagram for how I may break the piece apart. It might break down into 90-degree angles. It might break down into skewed 30-degree angles, all of which change the way that the profile is viewed, right? If you cut something at 30 degrees, the profile will reveal slightly differently than if you cut it straight. Does that make sense?
I think it does.
Okay. Yeah, so if you take a square piece of clay, and cut it straight, and it will look like a square.
Yes.
And if you cut it at a 30-degree angle, it will look more like a rectangle.
Yeah,
right?
Okay, yes.
So I make those decisions, and then I sort of draw them on the top of the plaster mold, right, the flat top of it. And then I'll just cut those pieces on the bandsaw and remove plaster. So let's say I had something that was 1 inch wider. I threw it 1 inch wider than I needed it.
Mm-hmm.
I'll cut 1 inch of plaster out of the center of that and stick it back together. Hence how it's both, there's a radius there, it's round, but then it's also square where those beveled edges meet. Right? There are no keys on the sides of these molds, which I think might throw some people off if they are listening right now. They might think, well, how do you key it then? It's keyed solely from the bottom and the top of the piece. Does that make sense?
I think it does, yeah.
So then once I have these forms, which are concrete, it's almost like I have the form, but it's lost its gravity, right?
Yeah.
It's plaster now. I can then lay that piece of plaster down like a piece of drawing paper, right? I can split it into 4 parts, and if they're carefully labeled, I know how they will sit in space, right?
Yes.
Does this make sense?
Yes, totally.
So they're little 3-dimensional pieces of paper, and then I have casting slip, which we all know of, correct?
Yes.
And I color that with mason stain with just tons of different colors, and I have all sorts of buckets lying around the studio with purples and reds and greens and oranges and yellows and blues and many different values, 6 different values of gray and a white and a black. And I just pour some of that slip onto the surface of a piece, and then I take an X-Acto knife and cut what I need, and then discard what sits outside of that.
Fascinating. That makes sense to me. It totally makes sense to me.